I learned to be kinder to myself, which was not that easy. Of course, you feel these feelings, like we feel what we feel, but what are you adding on to it? And can you care about yourself anyway?
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode 179. Today, we are talking about loving kindness and mindfulness for real happiness with Sharon Salzberg. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course, and I'm the author of the upcoming new book, Raising Good Humans, which you might be able to find at raisinggoodhumansbook.com. Woohoo! Pre-order may be on. You should check it out. I don't know why I'm singing. I'm just so excited to have Sharon Salzberg, who is I'm so honored to have had the chance to talk to this amazing teacher. Dear listener, I'm so excited that you are here. I'm so grateful for you to be here because you are going to be in the presence of a world-renowned teacher. And Sharon Salzberg she's taught me so much, along with so many others. She is the author of Real Happiness, Faith, and Loving Kindness. She has taught loving kindness around the world. She is respected with her own work, and she has been teaching for many, many years, as you will hear. I'm so excited for you to talk to and meet Sharon Salzberg in this conversation. And you're going to hear that she had an early childhood that was filled with fear, uncertainty, and trauma. And she took those challenges and found that the teachings of the Buddha normalized her suffering and really gave her a path to freedom from that. And she's followed that path to become one of the most preeminent teachers of mindfulness in the world through her writings, her talks, and her retreats. And in this episode, she shares insights into meditation and loving kindness practice in her really down-to-earth, relatable way that really provides some true insight. So I want you to listen for a few things in this conversation. I want you to listen for that the engine for insight is mindfulness. And this is something to kind of chew on, right? How loving kindness practice is actually an antidote to fear, which is so cool. And the core of meditation and loving kindness practices is to shift how we're relating to our own experience. So this is a really, really exciting episode. I'm so happy for you to be here and to hear Sharon Salzberg. Before we dive in, I want to make a quick shout out to those who have left a review of the Mindful Mama podcast on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. It makes a huge difference. If you're a listener and you haven't left a review yet, please do. It makes a big difference sharing these awesome teachers and speakers with so many others because of the iTunes algorithm and all that. So please leave a review. And if you like this podcast, share it with friends, leave a review, do something to help support the podcast that my team and I work hard at to get to you each week. So thank you so much in advance. All right. Now, so excited. I wish I had drum rolls. Join me at the table as I talk to Sharon Salzberg. So Sharon Salzberg, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
No, it's delightful. Thank you.
So I just want to take this opportunity right away to just fangirl on you just a little bit. Your teachings and your books have been so influential to me. And your book, Real Happiness, is one of my all-time favorite books on meditation that there ever was written. And I've actually used this as required or recommended reading for a mindful parenting course that I teach. I have sent it to people all around the world. I love it so, so much. So thank you for this amazing work. And I'm just really, really honored that you have a chance to come here to the Mindful Mama podcast.
Well, thank you so much, really.
And this work, the work on loving kindness and the work with meditation that you've dedicated your life to, this came out of your own life, right? You had a really challenging childhood that you had to contend with. So if you don't mind, tell the listener a little bit about what you went through as a child that, maybe started some of the seeking that you did.
Yes, I did have a very rocky childhood. And I wrote this one book called Faith, which is kind of like my spiritual autobiography. And in writing it, I looked back over my childhood a lot. And I calculated and I realized I went to college when I was 16. By the time I went to college, I had lived in 5 different family configurations, each of which had been ended or changed by a death or some significant trauma. So my parents split up when I was 4. I lived with my mother, and she died when I was 9. And then I went to live with my father's parents, and it kept going on from there. I hadn't seen or heard from my father since I'd been 4, and he left. And he returned when I was 11 after his father died, who I was living with. And he was in a really unstable place by then. He was drinking a lot. He had all kinds of mental problems, and he was just there for about 6 weeks, and he ended up going into a psychiatric facility where he then was for, some facility or another, one kind or another, until he died, which was many, many years later. So, it just was like that. And so
it's like a roller coaster.
It was really mostly down. And when I went to college, in my sophomore year, I took an Asian philosophy course, and that was really the beginning of everything changing. It was in that course, first of all, in all those years going through all of that, like for many people, my family was not one where all of this or any of this was really spoken about openly. And so I didn't know what to do with all of those really difficult feelings inside of me. And so I took this Asian philosophy course, and I hear about the Buddha, and here's the Buddha saying right out loud, suffering is a part of life. And so for me, the hidden message in that was, you're not so alone, you're not so different, you're not so weird, you don't have to feel so isolated. This is a natural, although difficult, it's a natural part of things. And so that was hugely important for me. And then I heard in the context of that course that there was such a thing as meditation practice, that people could actually train their attention in different ways so that they could be a whole lot happier. And I just thought, I really want to learn how to do that. And that's such a powerful moment. I look back at that moment all of the time, because I think, I was going to school in Buffalo. I wasn't content to just like stay in Buffalo and like go to graduate school studying the stuff, or having it in some sort of abstract fashion. I wanted to know how to do it. And I looked around Buffalo, and this was, of course, a long time ago. This was like 1969 or 70. And I just didn't find it anywhere. And so I created a project. There was an American Studies department that had an independent studies component to it. And if you created a project that they liked, the theory was you could go anywhere in the world for a year and then come back, And so I created this project. Yeah, I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. So that's how I ended up going.
Wow. I mean, I can imagine at that point. I'm kind of wondering, like, what young Sharon was doing to cope. Like, what do you remember what you were doing? I mean, to have, your mother die when you're so young, to see this degeneration, all this upheaval and all this trauma and all this difficulty, many of us would be turning to some nefarious things to be coping with that. What were you coping with before you found your Asian studies course?
Well, it was the late 60s. It was also, it was a kind of riotous time. I think there's always something in me, long before I went to Buffalo, that it was almost like this voice inside of me that said, things can be different. Things will be different. You got to hang in there, or something like that. I can remember it very distinctly. Mm-hmm. And so I knew how to finish school. I loved reading. I was a really good student. I loved learning. And I think that was a very significant thing, actually. And when I got to school, I made, kind of different kinds of friends, and it was like a bigger world for me. And it was a great atmosphere, although it was very tumultuous. There were lots of days that there were riots on campus or something against the war.
Yeah.
That war. And it was a time of, it was also a time of like incredible exploration. The State University of New York at Buffalo had this fabulous English department, and but I can remember like my freshman English class. He came. We were reading Ken Kesey, and he came in. The teacher came in and did like a tarot reading or something like that. It wasn't like the classics.
Nice.
So it was an amazing atmosphere.
It's pretty amazing that you got yourself to India. You had this, this childhood with all this upheaval, and you got, to this, you said, okay, well, where is it? Where can I study this? So I'll just go to India, which is not what most of us have to do to study meditation nowadays, thank goodness. But I imagine that must have been incredibly difficult thing, like, because you hadn't traveled anywhere at this point, had you, at all?
No, not really. I'm fond of saying, because it's true, that I got to India long before I got to California. There'd been one kind of family trip when I was a child to Miami, from New York, but that was it. And getting to India, as most of us were getting there in those days, meant, flying to somewhere in Europe, and then it was a succession of buses and trains. And
oh my gosh! Not flying into India, but buses.
No. I mean, some people I'm sure did, and later on I did, but most of us were doing the overland route.
Wow.
In some ways, so it was arduous. It was like major culture shock. I wasn't alone. I had a small group of friends that I was with, which was great. But
that took some courage. That was probably, that in itself is part of your transformation, I imagine, is just getting yourself there. To get there is an incredible act of courage for a suburban, white girl from...
Yeah.
Wow. And so you discovered meditation in India, you discovered other people seeking, you discovered teachers. Ultimately, I know you've shared your story about India and in other great interviews, but I want to get to where you learned about loving kindness meditation, which became your signature teaching. So when did you first learn about metta, which is the Pali word for loving kindness? When did you first learn about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to India in the fall. It was the fall semester. It was 1970, and I wandered around because I was looking for something, I think, pretty distinct. I was looking for a method. I was looking for practice. I was looking for kind of very direct how-to instruction. And it took a while in India to find just that. And I finally heard about these intensive 10-day, they weren't completely silent, but partly silent retreats that were going on, they had just started in that country. And they were very much about just that. It was like the straight stuff. Here's the method. Here's help in doing it. Let's practice together. Do you have any questions? It was like, and as I heard about it, I thought, oh, that's it. That's exactly the kind of thing I've been looking for. So I entered my first intensive 10-day meditation retreat, which is where I learned how to meditate.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, January 7th, 1971. So that was an insight meditation retreat. And we'd say the engine, the methodology for developing insight is mindfulness. It was a mindfulness retreat in terms of the method and the style and, the instruction. And then right at the very end, almost at the end of the 10 days, almost like a kind of ceremonial way of saying goodbye, there was a short guided loving kindness sitting. And it was almost like ritualistic, like, oh, we've been together, we've had this incredible experience. Let's devote some of that energy to the world and okay, bye. And so I was just really taken with it. And I thought, wow, what's that? I really want to learn more about that. And it actually proved to be many years before I could get a situation where there was an instructor and a deep familiarity with that particular form of meditation. And but finally in 1985, I went to Burma for kind of a 3-month immersion into doing loving kindness.
And the loving kindness meditation was, it's interesting because I wanted to talk more about it, having just gone on that wonderful retreat with you at the Barry Center. And it's interesting that it was one of the original, sometimes people think like this idea of sending ourselves loving kindness or sending others loving kindness is this sort of like soft and fluffy kind of thing, right? But like this was like this an original teaching thousands and thousands, 2,600 years ago by the Buddha, right? Like this was not just something that American Western people made up.
No, although I'm often bizarrely given the credit, because I wrote an early book about it and I was teaching it quite early in this country. And so it was very funny. I was teaching a loving kindness weekend somewhere and somebody came up to me and said, "This is so great. When did you make it up?" I said, "Well, I didn't make anything up, lucky for you." They say the Buddha taught it directly. He taught it as an antidote to fear. And it's kind of like a parallel practice in a way. It's not just the practice, it's the whole notion of love in this culture, tends to be aligned with people's ideas of being sentimental or too soft or maybe giving in too much. And I find that that's been one of the two big controversies I've encountered in teaching loving kindness. Some people think, oh, that's like gooey, like I'll just get this really stupid smile on my face and I'll be happy because I'm loving, even though these terrible things are going on and I won't care. And, so they don't even necessarily think of it as desirable. And the second great controversy is we would say that qualities like love or compassion can be trained, that can be developed. And that's not a particularly Western notion. I found that here people tend more to think that, it's almost like a gift and either you've been given it or not. And if you haven't been, you're out of luck. Whereas in Eastern psychology, like in Buddhist psychology, they would absolutely say these things can be trained because a lot of them are rooted in, qualities like loving kindness or compassion. They're rooted in how we pay attention because it's about connection. If you're talking to a person you've just met and you're not really listening to them and you're thinking about the email you need to send or whatever, there's not really the foundation being laid for any kind of connection. And so there won't be a flow of compassion, for example. And we know absolutely attention can be trained because it's exactly what meditation is. So it's its own distinct method for training attention.
I guess the Buddha could see that, what we call now that natural negativity bias, right? Like we know now why that is and what that is. And I think of, Thich Nhat Hanh would say that like these are these are seeds within us that we can cultivate. And so I guess the idea is that loving kindness is something that maybe is naturally in us. And as we pay more attention to it with these practices, we water these seeds, and that is just the attention on that is what makes it so the seeds of fear aren't watered. Is that what you
I mean, I think that's right. And it's also just sheer attention in a different way. So it's like if you are the kind of person who at the end of the day, you kind of do a checklist, like how did I do today? You sort of evaluate yourself. And let's just say you're the kind of person who pretty well only remembers the mistakes you made or what you didn't say right or what you could have done better, let's just say. The practice of loving kindness is consciously shifting your attention to wishing yourself well. Instead of going through the list for the billionth time this week of your faults and your flaws and your mistakes. Those might be true. You're not entering this realm of crazy denial, but it's not all that's true. But it's usually what we focus on. So we're going to take our attention and put it in a place that doesn't usually get a lot of airtime.
Yeah.
And so that shift really helps us have, again, it's like we've created the context or the environment out of which qualities like loving kindness can emerge.
I want to talk more about loving kindness, but I also want to think about like mindfulness meditation itself, right? Like, so do you think that loving kindness meditation, it can be something that we practice alone, or is it better to have a mindfulness meditation practice alongside with that, or a mindfulness meditation practice and then a loving kindness practice after that? Or, how are they related to each other?
I think they've related to each other differently at different eras of history. The more direct answer is I think both are really good to have. And most people I know do end up practicing both. They're just like different skills, somewhat different skills. They're very close kind of collaborators. They work together really well, but they're each kind of designed differently. And so which order you do it in, historically in the time of the Buddha, people would do something like loving kindness first, and then, especially having developed some concentration through it, they would have gone on to do a sort of mindfulness, a more open awareness practice. And, by the time 2,500 years later, when I was practicing intensively, like in Burma, the tendency and the preference was that you do insight meditation first, because no matter what practice you're doing, a lot of things are going to come up. You're going to get sleepy, or you're going to get anxious just from time to time. At any rate, that particular thing you've been carrying forever, you haven't really wanted to look at, it's right there. You don't have any distractions anymore. How do you deal with turbulence? How do you deal with experiences that might be very good but are painful? All of that is a kind of a learned skill as well for many of us. Some of us had childhood, so we learned it there, and some of us did not, and so...
A lot of us did not.
Yeah, a lot of us did not. And so, it's like a learned skill. And so those two practices would approach that. They would be somewhat different skills, toward the same end. Yeah. And so usually they like people to have some mindfulness practice. It's the ability to let go of distraction, not take things so to heart, to remember everything's changing all of the time. And that's a good thing, it's a good set of tools to have with you as you embark on loving kindness practice. But there are an awful lot of people who are doing it the really old-fashioned way, and they're starting with loving kindness practice for one reason or another, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I guess it's not really going to be harmful. Like
No, no,
I don't
no.
think I don't think it would. But yeah, you just to jump over to mindfulness meditation for a minute. You talk beautifully about like the benefits of meditation in real happiness, and you say that will you'll see these assumptions that are kind of getting in the way of happiness, and you'll also you'll recapture energy, you'll stop limiting yourself, you'll be able to also see these good parts of yourself as well. What have you discovered in your own life personally? Like, because you had this incredibly tumultuous childhood, and you've done so much meditation practice and loving kindness practice since then. What benefits have you personally experienced?
It's almost an impossible question for me because I've been
Yeah.
practicing since I was
Yeah.
18 years old, which was a long time ago now, a very long time ago. And so I don't know. My life without it is sort of unimaginable to me. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's been the core of my life for, we're getting on toward 50 years, and so, but all along the way, even in the very beginning, because I talk about, in teaching, I often talk about my own earlier experiences. And I could see right away, some of it's kind of like what I was just saying, some of the same patterns, like my fear and my anger would come up, but I didn't take it so to heart. I didn't kind of get overcome in the same way, like, oh, this is the only thing I'll ever feel for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to be kinder to myself, which was not that easy. Of course you feel these feelings, like we feel what we feel, but what are you adding on to it, and can you care about yourself anyway? And, it was all like learned skills.
It's fascinating. Like sometimes I wonder because I've had similar experiences with my meditation practice, which I've been practicing for 14 years now, and just these feelings of like it's been a profound change for me. And then, but sometimes I also wonder, like, how the heck does this work? Like, all you do is you sit down. I kind of think of it like the Buddha figured out this brain hack, right? Like, you just sit down and you just sit still with all this stuff that's coming up, and you just stay there. And somehow, miraculously, you like start to feel better with it. And it doesn't, somehow, I don't even understand how it works, really.
Who does? No, I mean, the hard thing, or a hard thing for many people, is that we tend to look at, say you're sitting every day, that's your form of dedicated practice. We tend to look at that 20-minute period, and say, well, am I making progress? Is it worth pursuing? And it may be that you're not going to see much of a change or a shift in that 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day in which you formally practice, but you will find you're like a different person. We get different with ourselves and how we speak to ourselves, and different with our families, and different in the world, different when we meet a stranger, and different when we have adversity as well. And so if we look in the right place, we'll see if there's been a benefit or not. But most people, we tend to look in the wrong place. So we feel kind of frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back over to loving kindness meditation, and you mentioned a couple times that like we have this tendency to be so hard on ourselves, and I tend to think that's very cultural, like just the sort of whole Judeo-Christian atmosphere that we live in and all of that. But we think that being hard on ourselves is like this is like almost a good thing. This is how we're going to change. But you point out that this is not actually not actually true. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the core of both styles of practice, mindfulness and loving kindness, has to do with how we're relating to what our experience is. And so the presence or absence of a particular emotion or mind state or pattern is not really the crucial question. The crucial question becomes, how do you relate to it? Because there are ways that, say, a wave of anger can come up, that is like a weather system moving through our body. And there are ways that anger can come up and we dive into it and we nurse it and we, get 50 new plans for revenge, and it takes over our life and kind of ruins our day. Or that anger might come up and we can just hate ourselves. We can be so ashamed of it and freaked out about it that we get lost in it that way. And so it's still anger coming up, but we're relating to it in a very different way. And so I've seen people get very discouraged there too. The ways in which you see a kind of thought in your mind, and you think, I'm not going to go there. I've been there. Let's just let it go. And it's gentle and it's loving and it's amused often.
Oh, yeah. There you are again.
There you are again, And so that's what we're really going for.
And so the practice of loving kindness is a way of like generating, training that self-compassion. And of course, Kristen Neff and other researchers have done that work that shows that it's actually helps us to make changes more easily when we have this self-compassion. So can maybe we should describe like exactly how does one practice self-compassion and metta/loving kindness? How do we do that? What are some ways to start, and what did they traditionally teach, and what do you teach?
Well, self-compassion is its own thing, It's like a very innovative and for Western psychology, the confounding thing about self-compassion is that culturally we're not trained to think of it as a strength. I want to learn something, I want to change a habit, I want to make progress in something. But we tend to think being kind of harsh or punitive, like get with it already, is the way. And the research is showing, I understand that it actually, we will make the most progress over a sustained period of time through self-compassion, like giving ourselves a break. We blow it, we fall asleep meditating, we
yell at our kids.
We yell at our kids, exactly. We don't fulfill our aspiration. And either we spiral down, for like a week and a half in judgment, or we say, you know what? That's a very human thing to do. It's painful. I don't want to keep cultivating that. But I'm gonna let go and move on with greater resolve and greater energy. And it makes sense, although we don't think of it that way, usually, that having compassion for oneself and being able to move on with greater energy, we're going to get a lot more changes done, whereas that kind of endless guilt and self-laceration and just going over and over and over and over and over the mistake that we made, it leaves us exhausted, it leaves us demoralized, and it doesn't leave us with that kind of resilience to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to start over and I'm going to try my best not to do it again because I can see how painful it is. And so I think one of the exercises Kristen has is, you imagine your friend, somebody you really care about, in a chair next to you, and then you kind of imagine yourself speaking to them the way you normally speak to yourself. And it's like, it's impossible. We don't do that. But we do it with ourselves. And so the biggest hurdle, I think, is it's like with loving kindness. It's understanding that this is a desirable state. This isn't like lazy, or this isn't for weaklings. So how we would develop self-compassion in the meditative realm is many ways, whatever technique you're doing. Let's say you're just settling your attention on the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath. Now, that was the first technique I ever learned when I went to India. It's a very foundational mindfulness technique. And I, heard that instruction, as you probably heard me say, I thought, that's stupid, like it's so elementary, like feel my breath. I could have stayed in Buffalo to feel my breath. Here's the like magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering. And then I thought, oh, well, how hard can this be? And it was very hard, to my shock. It wasn't like 800 breaths or 900 breaths before my mind started to wander. It was like one breath or half a breath, and then I would be gone and way gone, or I'd fall asleep or whatever. And that happens to us. That's the way our minds have been trained, to be kind of scattered or distracted or get overwhelmed with things. And then comes this magic moment when we emerge from the fantasy or the memory and we think, oh, the breath.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm supposed to be doing.
That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is a very important moment, because we've already blown it in the light of, what we set out to do. We've already fallen asleep or been lost in a fantasy. So this is the moment of repair, of potential repair. Are we going to be able to let go and start over, which is the path toward resilience and bouncing back? Or are we going to spend the next hour and a half judging ourselves for having gotten lost in a thought?
So like the failure is the golden moment, like that. The
right.
Failure is the point. I mean, it's called noble failure, right? Like
the failure is the moment. It's the most crucial moment. And that's where you develop a huge amount of compassion for yourself, even if you never use that term.
Because it's so dang hard.
Yeah, it's like the only way to let go and begin again is to sort of get that muscle going. Because it's so tempting just to, if you're in a retreat, you compare yourself to everyone else in the room, or you start thinking, I heard that so-and-so sat down and they were just like floating away to see bliss, and I don't have any bliss. And, I'm just thinking, or whatever it is, that's much more how we're conditioned.
Well, most people don't practice. I think most people are not practicing meditation for the first time in a retreat in India. Most people are kind of trying this thing at home on their own. So, do you have any advice for people to get past that point, right? Because what happens, I think, a lot is that people get to this point of like, oh, I've just been sitting here planning my day for 10 minutes. This did nothing. They say, I'm not good at this. And they say, well, this isn't worth it. I'm not going to do this thing. So what do you say to those people? How can we help those people?
Well, in a way, it's like when you talked about the book I wrote, Real Happiness. In a way, that's why I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm. Read the book.
Read the book. Thank you. Well, there's something about, do what you can do to help establish a context for yourself. I mean, you don't have to do 10 years of study, unless you want to. But there's some understanding that I think makes it so much easier for us. So whether that's doing some reading or listening to some talks, or if you live in a place where there's like a physical place you can go, just to sit with other people and like hear those conversations, it can be helpful because, I find we tend to bring, obviously, all our old conditioning with us, when we go to practice. And so that's usually very judgmental, and people have lots of ideas about what should be happening. There's so many times these days when I'm introduced as a meditation teacher somewhere, and somebody will say to me, oh, I tried that once, I failed at it. And then, if I have time, I'd like to know, why do you think you failed at it? And then they say, well, I couldn't make my mind blank. I couldn't keep all thoughts from coming. I couldn't have only serenity, and beautiful emotions. But often it's around destroying thoughts, not having a thought come up in your head. And, first of all, we don't believe you could ever fail at meditation. And second of all, that's not what we're aiming for anyway. That's an impossible state, What I was talking about before is really much more the aim. It's a different relationship to thoughts, to feelings, to our body, to everything, but not to sort of destroy, our capacity to think or something like that. And that's the idea that most people hold. And so to be able to practice without falling sway so much to the old conditioning we have. Makes it
So,
easier.
yeah. Yeah. So for the listener was in that place, it sounds like, it's just remembering, in a lot of ways that failure is the crucial moment. That is the rep in the
Yeah,
gym where
yeah,
you're
it
doing
is.
that bicep
It
curl.
is.
Like that's the important part. And to get to that point and to realize that you're at that point at all, that's a win. And so we can just recognize that as a win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we start to, so then starting to meditate and kind of seeing these thoughts, maybe starting to see that, we have a lot of unkind thoughts. This may be when people start to see the value of cultivating this sense of loving kindness or metta. And traditionally metta starts with sending loving kindness towards ourselves, right? But lots of people have problems with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the underlying principle of the practice, I was taught, is that it's meant to be done in the easiest way possible.
Yeah.
It's not a practice of struggle. It's like we're putting building blocks in place, all of the time. And so if we start with something that's relatively easy, we can build up strengths and qualities. So by the time we're doing something more difficult, we've got that on our side. We've gone through stuff, we've built up a capacity and so on. So it actually makes sense, but it's actually quite hard to do something in the easiest way possible. So traditionally, I should say also the practice of loving kindness is not really, in terms of method, it's not the same as settling your attention on the feeling of the breath. But instead, we use the silent repetition of certain phrases as that kind of anchor. And the phrases are the expression of gift giving, it's offering. It's like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful. Sometimes the grammatical construct of may you confuses people. Like people say to me all the time, well, who are you asking? I say, well, I'm not asking anybody anything. It's like you hand someone a birthday card and you say, may you have a great year. That's kind of the flow of it. So we settle our attention on these phrases, and in some ways the skill set is the same. Your mind goes a million other places. You realize that, see if you can let go and come back. And so that's really the unfolding method. So in the practice of it, there's a certain sequence that traditionally was said to be based on that principle of doing it the easiest way possible. First, we offer loving kindness to ourselves, then to a benefactor, that's someone who's helped us or inspired us. We offer loving kindness to a friend. This isn't all like jammed into one sitting necessarily, but this is the arc of the whole sequence. So it's ourselves, a benefactor, a friend, then someone known as a neutral person, someone we don't strongly like or dislike. And this is, often these days it's someone who plays some role in our lives, like a checkout person in the supermarket or a dry cleaner, someone we tend to see now and then.
My barista.
Okay. And then after the neutral person, we offer loving kindness to a difficult person. And this is the same principle. They say don't start with the most unthinkable person for you. Start with somebody where you have a little bit of annoyance and like more slowly make your way over. But after the difficult person, it's like the open extension of loving kindness to all beings everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's, it's all based on that one principle. Now, the reality is that we are often not the easiest person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always say, going back to that principle, just shift the order, shift the sequence. That's, you're not failing, it's doing what's right to be that flexible.
Just kind of checking in with what feels right for you. So yeah, so the principle is start with what's easiest, and that for me, it was okay to do that for myself. But for many, it's like, it's just someone else who's easier to love. And that can even be like a pet, right? It's just about kind of finding a little bit of that feeling. Is that what it makes?
Yeah, I mean, the texts say that category, the benefactor, who makes you smile when you think of them.
Mm-hmm.
And often that means for us an embodiment of love.
Yeah.
And that's why it can be a pet. Sometimes it's an owl, sometimes it's a child, sometimes it's a pet.
For me, it was my good friend's mom growing up. She was like a second mother to me. And my own mom, I wish her loving kindness all the time. But my good friend's mom, of course, probably never, never had to discipline me or anything like that. So she was just this wholly loving figure. So a shout out to Anita Souza. You're my
All right.
You mentioned that timeline, which is something that I didn't realize for a number of years, is that this isn't something you do all in one sitting. I used to do it all in one sitting in the very beginning. And going back to the week-long retreat, we did, one a day, so spending a whole day doing loving kindness for ourselves. But practicing at home, we might say, then you practice loving kindness for yourself for a couple of weeks or a week or whatever. What would you say to that as far as that timeline?
You could do it that way. And another way people sometimes do it, once you've experienced some of the different categories, might be like any one session. Of course, it depends on how long that session is. But I usually say, well, think of it as bookends. You're starting with yourself. You're going to end with all beings everywhere. And you may have time for one other in the middle. So maybe your dry cleaner is your neutral person. You're going to go to the dry cleaner later that day, so you're going to use them for that middle part. It may be that your friend's getting an award, so you're going to use them. Or your friend's having surgery. You're going to use them or something, So it's a balancing act. You don't want to feel rushed, like, oh, I got a second and a half to, it's too much. If we can slow down and focus, our concentration will be much stronger. But it needs to be alive, and meaningful too. And so we have to find that balance every session.
And when we're wishing, so I think sometimes people feel guilty about not including kind of everyone you love, right? When it's that person you love. But it's really about just kind of focusing our attention. Part of it is the practice of simply the concentration, right?
Yeah, it's right. And you won't get everybody. And so sometimes I say, you don't have to, because the shift is happening within us. And so, the dynamics with everybody will, potentially be altered with that shift within us. But it's just sometimes I just say, we'll have a party before the end of the sitting, like invite a whole bunch of people in that you feel, maybe should have rightfully been there all along.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, so loving kindness, we talked a little bit about the benefits of meditation in general, but loving kindness meditation, in your book, Loving Kindness, you talk about what the Buddha said, that it brings some particular advantages, some that are kind of interesting. And that I think number 7 is that external dangers, poisons, weapons, and fire will not harm you. Thinking about it more broadly, what do you see as some of the benefits of practicing?
Yeah, well, maybe I should say a word about poisons and fire. I'll try that at home. No, there are a lot of legends, that the Buddha himself, he had a cousin who hated him and let loose a raging elephant at him. And the Buddha's metta was so strong. It's METTA, 2 T's. The Buddha's metta was so strong that the elephant came close and bowed down. It may not happen that way. So
that'd be great. I would love to see an elephant. Since you have practiced so much metta in your life, Sharon, I would love to see this scene where some elephant comes bowing down.
I don't know. Well, the primary benefit, you could say, to the practice of loving kindness is within ourselves. I have experienced and I've witnessed over and over again it's a real shift from a primarily fear-based realm of relationship to one of connection, or even interest, like meeting that stranger, giving ourselves a break, being kinder to ourselves, even with an adversary, coming to a place of not kind of nursing the grudge for, the billionth hour, but recognizing, when I act in a really bad way, it's coming from a place of pain. Perhaps they're coming from a place of pain too. Would that they could move out of that painful state. They would be happier. Everyone would be happier. We'd all benefit. It's just a different way of relating.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I was saying earlier, that's where it really counts is what happens in our life. And we do see that very much. And I always come back to the Buddha taught loving kindness is the antidote to fear.
Yeah.
Because this is also a time where a lot of people say, it makes no sense to me. It's a very aversive time. There's a lot of positionality. There's a lot of hatred in the air.
Yeah.
And people say, I don't think so. And I usually say, well, if you think of something like love or loving kindness as giving in, letting people hurt you, not taking a stand for your own sense of what's right, then it makes no sense. You're correct. But what if it really is the antidote to fear? Like, wouldn't that be a kind of useful thing? And so I usually talk about loving kindness as an experiment. I think it's worth the experiment. You can always stop, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, I like practicing I always find that experiment very useful in things like the airport security line and places like that. And I think the teaching of saying, that this person, especially when we practiced with the difficult person on the retreat, it was with someone who was a friend who I felt hurt by. And to think, just to say, recognize this person just wants to be happy just as I want to be happy. Like, okay, I could get there, and it did really feel very healing. And ultimately, I didn't feel like after, I'd been practicing meditation for a lot of years, I didn't feel terribly judgmental, but I realized like some places where I was judgmental after that, like I could see when I got back, I was walking in my parents' neighborhood and I know I saw some, like there's a lot of houses with some really ugly tchotchkes on the lawn in the neighborhood. And instead of being so judgmental about the ugly tchotchkes in the lawn, I thought, these ugly tchotchkes are just there because somebody wants to be happy. Like this is the reason why these exist here in the lawn.
That's a great lesson. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, like you were talking about how it's not, rather than not only is it not hindering us, but it's actually giving us a much broader perspective that's actually much more honest and closer to the truth than constantly being like, two fists facing each other, to actually be able to see sort of the whole of the person you're having a difficulty with, makes it so much easier to relax and relate, for sure. Yeah. You put a beautiful poem or a bit of a poem in your book, Loving Kindness. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read it. The bud stands for all things, even those things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within of self-blessing, though sometimes it is necessary to reteach things its loveliness, to put a hand on the brow of the flower and retell it in words and touch. It is lovely until it flowers again from within of self-blessing. And that's why by Galway Kinnell. It's such a beautiful choice to reteach a thing its loveliness.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem, and I think so evocative of that feeling and spirit of loving kindness practice.
Yeah. I think that sometimes like we get these moments in our life where, for most of us, I think we get these sort of fleeting moments where we say, oh my gosh, life is precious. Life is beautiful. I need to appreciate this life. Right. But for I think the most of us, like our brain, that sort of survival brain takes over, and we're just not able to. And it's not our fault, but we're just not able to. And this is a practice of helping us to be able to appreciate all the blessings of this fleeting life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Well said.
Well said. I imagine you get some amazing mail to you, because I recently, I've been teaching some versions of loving kindness, and I recently got, kind of this one piece of amazing mail where it helped a woman be with her dying mother, and this practice. And I imagine you get some amazing mail that, and I imagine some of the is part of what helps you to continue teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's, well, first of all, it's everyone's own effort, and it's an incredible privilege for me to be a vehicle for more people to know about these methods. But, one of the great frustrations is that it doesn't work because you've read a book about it. It's like you have to actually practice it, and more than once. So it's really one's own effort that makes for that kind of transformation. And the greatest transformation is within ourselves. And that's not to say that, there's not an energy that it's like a gift, that is actually potentially going to be received by another. But you can't do the practice with a kind of attachment like, well, if I really pump it out, you won't be so obnoxious on Monday morning. It's not like that. It's a gift. It's a freely given gift that we're offering. And we can definitely trace the changes within ourselves. And hopefully it has, because we shift, dynamics do shift, and real life relationships shift. And hopefully it also has some kind of energy in the world.
Yeah, I think so. That as we create more peace in ourselves, we create more peace for everyone. Yeah. And I love that you said that it's a gift, because I know that many of my listeners, many of the listeners are moms, and often feel kind of hamstrung or guilty for doing things for themselves. And yet we can maybe make time to practice if we know that it's going to make you a better parent and better able to relate to others. And I think that, if that's what it takes to see these practices and be able to get yourself to do them as a gift for somebody else, that's great. But just like you just said, like, don't be attached to the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the outcome can be, it sounds like that the outcome kind of pops up in fleeting moments, and you never know what's going to happen, I suppose.
Yeah.
Experiment with it.
Yeah, it's true.
So if you have any final words of advice for maybe the listener who's just about to embark on says, yes, I'm inspired. I want to start this meditation practice. I want to start this loving kindness practice. Do you have any words of advice for someone like that?
Well, I'm, the kind of person who is very well served by structure. So I usually encourage people just, don't take on an impossible task. Like, see what's reasonable for you and create a structure and stick to it. So I'll ask people what feels right to you, and they'll say things like one person said, 10 minutes a day for a month. And then I'll evaluate. Then I'll take a look. Maybe that's too much for some people. It's 5 minutes a day for a week. Whatever it is. But set that in place, and then really make the experiment, and then you can assess. You'll see for yourself if it's worth pursuing.
Mm. Sharon Salzberg, thank you for not only coming on the podcast. I'm so deeply honored and touched that you came on the Mindful Mama podcast, but also for the work you've done in the world. I think that the way you transformed your own suffering is incredibly powerful. I mean, I think it shows the power of doing your own work to transform your own suffering and the effects that can have for so many others, millions and millions of others beyond which you'd never even realize. I'm sure the scope. And I personally have been really transformed by your teaching. And so I want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. I am so excited to hear your thoughts about what Sharon has said in this podcast. I think this is one to listen to again. If you would like to tell me what you're thinking about this podcast, go ahead and tag me on Instagram. I'm Mindful Mama Mentor. Hit me up in our Facebook group that you can find when you go to mindfulmamamentor.com. And please do support this podcast by subscribing and leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts. Makes such a big difference. So we are in a campaign this month to get those ratings out there because I know it, you're probably listening on your phone. You might want to go to your computer and do that. So I understand it can be hard to remember to do these things, but my team and I work so hard to get this podcast out to you each week, to get amazing world-class guests like Sharon Salzberg. And so you can support the work that we do and put out for you for free by leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts. And that makes such a huge difference. So thank you so much in advance if you are going to do that right now. Thank you. I don't know where the Southern accent came from all of a sudden. Anyway, I'm wishing you a beautiful week. I am still having my French adventure, which I will tell you all about when I get home. So if you are French, hit me up. Send me an email at hunter@mindfulmamamentor.com and let me know where I should go. And I'm wishing you a beautiful week. I'm wishing you some loving kindness for yourself, for your family. I hope that you can practice to cultivate that energy, and I will be practicing with you for sure. Okay? All right. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.